My area of work is in ICTs for rural development, so I'm very pleased to have been invited to chair this session today. And I was asked to give a little bit of background to start the day off on what is e-agriculture, since this is the first session of the agriculture group of themes. Maybe as a history, a little story. In the years 2003 and 2005 was an event called the World Summit on the Information Society, or WSIS, we call it for short, okay? WSIS was about the use of ICTs for development. It was convened by the United Nations and included all UN organizations, all member countries, many NGOs, and many other representatives from around the world. They actually met twice, which is very unusual for a World Summit. But it was felt that the topic was important enough and also new enough that they needed this amount of time to hash through all these ideas. Now, in WSIS, there was a typical, maybe typical or expected talk about many things related to e-issues, e-health, e-finance, e-banking, e-governance. These topics have been known a little bit longer and are more in the, at least in 2005, were more in the forefront of the minds of many people in ICTs for development. But during WSIS, it was realized that there might be a need to add a few more topics to get into some special subject matters. One of them was the area of improving rural development in general with ICTs, mainly through the exchange of practices and knowledge. Now, this was coined because they wanted a one-word e-term, as e-agriculture. Okay? So, the birth of e-agriculture, at least from our perspective, was in the year 2005 in the WSIS Action Line report. Specifically, if you're into reading these things, it's WSIS Action Line C7. But that's just, as I said, where this term comes from for most of us here. But then it really came down to actually really what is this thing, e-agriculture? Because truthfully, most of us, even who worked in ICTs, had never used the term before. And we had a lot of concern that our partners and stakeholders that we worked with who hadn't participated in WSIS would have no idea what it was, or maybe even worse, they'd have different ideas about what it was. It wasn't compatible. So in 2006, the year after the second WSIS summit, there was a global survey. We had respondents from over 3,400 people from 135 countries. And one of the questions in the survey basically was, what is e-agriculture to you? What does it mean to you? And it was an open question. And interestingly enough, the majority of the respondents identified e-agriculture with some form of improving the processes of information dissemination, access and exchange, and also communication, participation, and network community building amongst rural stakeholders, or the use of ICTs for development in general. So we were actually quite pleased to see this. It was, at least to me, who had been working in Asia Pacific at the time, quite an eye-opener that it was, majority of people saw it as one way. In April 2007, this resulted in a statement coming out of the UN about what e-agriculture was, and that a group of stakeholders intended to establish the e-agriculture community of practice. The e-agriculture community of practice is a specific group. There's a flyer on your seats about it, and I won't talk too much about it today. If you want to know more about it, you can come to the first session tomorrow, where I will be a speaker, not a host, and I will talk very specifically about this international group and what it does. But it's interesting to note that the year 2007 was a busy year for e-agriculture, because in July of the same year, eIndia added the e-agriculture track for the first time. So we're now here 3 years later in the third e-agriculture track for eIndia. In September of that year, the e-agriculture community launched an online platform at www.eagriculture.org. In December, GK3, which was the last great event of the Global Knowledge Partnership, a global knowledge sharing event held in Malaysia, featured e-agriculture very heavily. In March of 2008, a policy brief was released on emerging issues in e-agriculture. And in August of 2008, the e-agriculture community last year participated for the first time In August of last year, the agricultural community participated for the first time in eIndia, and that brings us today. So here we are. So this is sort of a timeline of e-agriculture, the global concept coming out of WSIS, about what's now known as the e-agriculture community of practice, and the participation of e-agriculture as a specific theme group in eIndia. So I'm very pleased to see you all here today. And just to remind you, there are actually 7 sessions. Today, the first one being this session on perspectives to practice. After this, we'll have a session on education, research, and extension, and the use of ICTs to improve these areas. After lunch, there will be a session on ICTs and the backward-forward linkages of agricultural inputs chain. So this is the importance of agricultural inputs, including knowledge and information, not just the more traditional inputs such as fertilizer, seeds, and labor. And the last session of the day will be on a budding reality of e-agriculture. This will be a very innovative, I think, interesting session on many new topics and uses of e-agriculture that are coming out in the region. Tomorrow morning we'll start out with a session on how e-agriculture is enabling agricultural development and rural development. And then we have a special session organized by ICRISAT here in Hyderabad on the role of e-agriculture in context of climate change. And the final session tomorrow is the role of ICTs in forging linkages between food, agriculture, and nutrition. And this is sponsored by the Solution Exchange Nutrition and Agriculture Group that's based out of New Delhi. So I will be at all of those. As I mentioned, I'm speaking in 2 more of them actually. So I look forward to seeing all of you also on the breaks. Please come make yourself known and get introduced. And without further ado then, I would like to introduce our first panelist. We're very pleased to have with us as our first panelist Dr. K.G. Kamakar, who is the Managing Director of the National Bank for Agriculture and Rural Development. Based in Mumbai, Mr. Kamakar has 30 years of experience as an executive in various banking and financial institutions, including over 23 years with his current institution where he's Managing Director. He specializes in agricultural credit, rural finance, finance and refinancing operations, and computerization and system developments. So as you see, he fits very well with our theme here of e-agriculture. He's led India's microfinance revolution and has operationalized over 4 million self-help groups in the country. So with a very impressive record, and without any further ado, I'd like to invite the Managing Director to come up and speak to us.